My name's Simon Cummins, and as you know, you've already been introduced to Nirav Patel here, the CEO of Andaria. Let's get straight into it, because we've only got a very short time. Nirav, why don't you give us a quick overview of Andaria and its journey to date?
Absolutely. Firstly, thank you for having me here. And I'd be silly if I didn't mention it. As a diehard Arsenal fan, a part of me feels like I'm in purgatory here, but great stadium and a pleasure to be here. So Andaria, as kind of introduced earlier, we are a regulated fintech out of the UK and Europe, really offering a pan-European solution in embedded finance. What does that mean to everyone in the room? Essentially, we'll get into the crux of it, but it's really focusing on the fan engagement. Over the past few years, we've really been building out our solution from a technology standpoint, really with a focus on kind of inclusivity, as we touched on, really engaging our core customer base, be that the football club and downstream to the fan base. And really the key focus being is if we can now start extracting value from that and really providing the value downstream to the clubs, we really see a great opportunity to really disrupt and innovate the sector, but really providing some excellent value add.
So embedded finance is a relatively new concept, and particularly into this sector. But at Odgers, placing CEOs most days of the week, 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, we used to be asked to find commercial directors, and they tended to come from broadcast or sponsorship backgrounds. Now that's completely shifted, and the briefs we're getting across the world are chief customer growth officers or chief digital strategy and data officers. How do we engage with the global fan? How do we engage with the fan that will never come through our turnstile, perhaps? And one of the key benefits, it seems, of embedded finance is for many football clubs, fan engagement is obviously crucial.
Yeah.
But how does the embedded finance contribute to better engaging supporters and fans?
Sure. So really the driver is to enhance the fan experience, but minimize the disruption in their journey. So if we take a slight step back, our challenge, or Andaria's challenge, to get directly onto the fan's phone effectively is getting our app on the phone. So our focus becomes, right, how do we circumvent that journey or streamline it? Now, what we know with anyone that's a fan of any club, for example, you will inevitably have the app on your phone. So that streamlines that first bit of the journey. Now, the next challenge is because we are a financial services organization, we're offering a payment solution really driven through the app. So what typically would have been used to kind of keep yourself updated with a football club, kind of what's happening, kind of potentially the opportunity to go and buy tickets. But when you go and buy that ticket, you're driven to a third-party site, so you kind of lose that engagement from the club standpoint. So we're now reinforcing that journey, and we're coupling that with loyalty. So let's take the first step. So we're offering now a payments account and a branded card that looks and feels like Tottenham, driven by Tottenham as a club, and I'll use that as the example as we're here. So that being the first key point. So because it's now looks and feels like Tottenham, they don't do any heavy lifting from a financial services standpoint. All of that heavy lifting is effectively done by Andaria in the background. We integrate our solution via SDKs, which is a software development kit, which streamlines the ability for Tottenham to absorb our tech, if you like, with minimal fuss. Now, on the other side of that, a fan of Tottenham has the ability to avail themselves to an account. They have to go through a KYC journey. So we couple that with the loyalty solution that the club has to basically direct them a certain way for that first initial journey. So you offer a rewards program which reinforces the proposition to go through this KYC process. Once you've got that, you've got a payment account and you've got a card. You've now got the ability to spend that in the stadium. So I'll refer to what we call closed loop and open loop. And what I mean by closed loop is if you now have, so let's assume Tottenham's been onboarded by Andaria, as has every fan within the stadium. Now, if I'm as a fan coming in every time I'm at the stadium, I'm buying myself a beer, a hot dog, and a burger, I now have the ability within the stadium to make that a peer-to-peer transaction. So what do I mean by that? Is I could go to a food and beverage bar or a terminal here that has its own account for Tottenham, and I, as a fan, so I'm identified as fan number 123, I go and buy my burger, my beer, and my hot dog. and you can start utilizing that data over time. So what you've got within this closed loop environment is, number one, an instant payment. So the CFOs of the football club will love that, because from a liquidity standpoint, they've got full control of the funds, of the cash instantly. Secondly is the data piece, and we'll obviously get into the value add there. But you're now able to start segmenting the fan, and you can start now pushing through notifications. One of the big drivers of clubs, from the conversations that we're having, is to get fans into the stadium sooner. Now, if you start really segmenting the spending habits of that individual within the club, and even outside, and I'll get to that in a second, you can start pushing these notifications to say there's an offer for you to get to the stadium at midday before a 3 o'clock kickoff, because there's an offer on beers, for example. That also can then start driving operational efficiencies, because if you know, as you're capturing the data, you're now capturing when certain items are being bought, how they're being purchased, you can then also start segmenting family. So you start getting to another driver for a lot of clubs is you tend to have an aging fan base, and it happens to most clubs. But a lot are not really strategizing about how they can start evolving that next generation and start bringing them in. So now myself with 2 kids and my wife, if we're at the game, while my children may not have kind of identification from a fan perspective, you know that if I'm buying a kid's meal or a juice, you now know that there's 2.4 children here, and now the notifications can start evolving. So we'll then go and capture that data to let the club know, like, you should maybe start thinking about how you utilize this family base. You've got a couple of kids who are kind of coming up to 16, 17, potential fans that kind of carry on the journey. We're literally at the tip of the iceberg with this, and that I've only got to kind of closed loop solution. The other side of it is we are a principal member of MasterCard and Discover. So that gives the ability to spend outside of the stadium as well. So there is a really value add on kind of how, from a community standpoint. So let me give you the example of, typically before a game, you'll have cohorts of fans probably gathering at pubs, especially in the UK. It's definitely, from a UK standpoint, you go to your usual pubs. Now, if you know that, 20% of the fan base is spending at the pub round the corner, there's a commercial tie-up from a community aspect to really drive an affiliation with your local pub. Even a silly example is, if you know that 50% of the fan base is eating at McDonald's 2 hours before the game, we can provide that value and data value to the commercial arms of the football club to say, guys, it's maybe worthwhile you guys having a chat with McDonald's to think about a marketing commercial tie-up. The use cases are insane in my opinion. I think the other challenge with fan engagement is, or maybe digital strategy, is it's very fragmented. We talked about it a little bit earlier. And it's fragmented because there are so many providers in the space. And I think the way to approach that from a strategic standpoint for clubs is to really look at kind of looking at things from within the bubble, and how you can maintain control rather than making it all fragmented. Easier said than done, and usually the approach is let's go for an omni-channel provider. But I think what happens with that is you lose the fan engagement piece. So for us, or for me as a fan, really, I kind of looked at this through the lens of a fan first and foremost, is how do we disrupt and make this more efficient, provide the value add not only for the fan, but also for the club. So that's kind of the fan engagement piece.
So it's a win-win on both sides.
Exactly.
Basically, the club are getting the information they want to leverage their revenue, but the fan is having a holistic solution for their purchasing.
Exactly.
And they're developing a deeper relationship with the club, getting their loyalty points, which then they can use directly through their app. Fascinating. So look, you mentioned data briefly.
Sure.
Data, the new goal, data insights. Everybody's talking about how do you, first of all, capture intelligent data that's meaningful and accurate, but then once you've got that data, how do you own it rather than a third party owning it? Then once you've cracked that, how do you then leverage it? So how does embedded finance develop that whole data ownership piece for for the club, and how does it work for the fan?
Sure, great question. I think the place to start is how is it set today? So typically, when an FS provider, let's say a payments partner, comes to a club, the journey for the fan is typically they're diverted to a third-party application. So it may have the branding of the club, but effectively you're disrupting the journey of the fan. But also at the same time, the rights from a data standpoint go and sit with that third-party app, because ultimately they're the owner from an FS standpoint. And again, based on GDPR and so on, you're taking your consent of the app. So the ownership of that data, subject to the consent of the fan, will sit with that third-party app. What Embedded does, first and foremost, is it integrates into the existing football club's app. So you still have the opt-in process from a GDPR standpoint, which is key, and you can't circumvent that. So you have to have buy-in from the fan. But the fact that it's now driven by your club means your fallout rate is not completely eliminated, but it's minimal in comparison to a third party. So I think that's a really key trigger point. It's a club that you've always followed and you always will follow. And now if they're kind of telling you to slightly evolve the journey, but also incentivizing you with a loyalty or rewards platform that you can then re-spend back in the club, the consent piece just becomes a tick in the box exercise. So the data ownership there, and this is key, will sit within the club, but it's on a tri-party basis. So we are the effort or the financial services provider, so it'd always be on a tri-party basis. Now, this is where the closed loop and open loop gets interesting. So anything closed loop wise within the stadium is much more freely available to the club. So we can segment the client down to the fan number, down to what they're spending at which terminal at what time, kind of all of that information, and then we can start dissecting that and work with the club's kind of data insights team to really kind of extract and utilize that data in a smart way. We'll present it in a kind of very set format, but the way you can kind of manipulate that and play with that data to make it meaningful is an exercise that we'd run through with the club, and I think that's a really exciting piece. The open loop is a little bit more kind of anonymized, so you get more wholesale value in the data on open loop spending. So as I mentioned, card spend at the McDonald's. So what we can give you is that actually utilizing any of the, let's just say the Tottenham cards, they will spend at McDonald's of X. So it's more anonymized. You can't quite segment there. And that's mostly driven by kind of what the scheme can and can't do for you. There is some talk about kind of things evolving to the extent that we can see exactly what's been purchased within a store, but I think we're a way off that from a card scheme standpoint. So I think really our value add is data, intra-stadium spend, and in the vicinity on a closed loop basis. So the key distinction is anything outside of the stadium is typically tapped on via your card. Anything in the stadium, we utilize a peer-to-peer mechanism. That can be as simple as a QR code functionality. It's really easy to bolt on to existing systems. And what it doesn't do is it doesn't remove the ability to pay with your card. So that's also a key factor for clubs because of tie-ups with existing financial services providers. So we don't want to go in there and say, no, you should stop doing this. We want to complement and effectively provide a tertiary avenue to go and utilize a payment. But if the driver is data, what you then say to your fan is, right, every time you're going, rather than using your card, use your QR code, and what we'll do is give you an extra 10 loyalty points. So the cost of acquisition for the club becomes reward points. Reward points can be translated into a purchase at the stores or whatever it might be, or a discount on your next meal. But that's how we kind of really drive the fan to really help kind of make it a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because if the fan's not going to utilize a QR code, you're not necessarily getting the utilization of the data. So you need to make sure there's a mechanism there to keep them incentivized.
And I guess going back to the dreaded opt-in or opt-out tick boxes that we all experience, I guess if you know what you're ticking is a box that gives your club the right to push stuff to you,
that's the big.
You're going to welcome it,
Exactly.
as opposed to ticking the box for MasterCard to push stuff to
Yes,
you. So
absolutely. And I think that's the key driver. Because it is a club, I say there's nothing more tribal than a sports fan, and I love that line because it's so inherently true. And what I mean by that is you will follow your club come rain or shine. And now that as I said, if they're asking you to slightly evolve your journey, But I think the key piece at the same time is incentivizing them. If you kind of flat out went, no, we just want you to opt in and there's no upside or no benefit, then kind of why am I doing it? There's still a bit of a hurdle there. But if you couple it with an incentive, the barrier to entry kind of hits the floor.
Yeah. And lots of people ask what seems a naive question, but actually the obvious one to ask is, once you've captured this data, Tottenham Hotspur, presumably we all know that data then is a certain demographic, it's a certain type of individual, therefore that data is valuable to your sponsor and your partner or other third parties.
That's where it starts getting
that's
very,
how
very
you can leverage that ownership, I guess.
And this is it. This now, so once you're segmenting the client, you now have the ability to really go to a sponsor and say, look, this is our value add, and really put a meaningful value on it. So from a commercial standpoint, the value proposition can go through the roof ultimately, because if you've now got the ability, I'm trying to kind of think of an example, but I don't know, something in let's take an Apple scenario, so phones or whatever it might be. If you know your demographic is young professionals that have the liquidity or the affluency to want to go purchase a phone, you can start bringing in your partner to that demographic. So again, there are so many ways to segment, and you can be very specific, but you also, not just the fan engagement now, you can start evolving this into the supplier network.
Yeah.
So you can now start segmenting the supplier network to make it much more meaningful for your fan base. And now if the rewards and loyalties can be linked to your partners and your sponsors, you can see how this kind of just starts to flow.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Lots of CFOs, CTOs, even CEOs I talk to are kind of scared of, the complexity of bringing in another system, or what appears to them as another bit of technology they might need to bolt on or try and integrate. And so the complexity of the actual tech scares people sometimes.
Sure.
And also they think that's going to be a big cost to bring in another tech platform.
Absolutely.
How debunk that myth for us?
Sure. So actually, if it's I wouldn't call it a myth. It's actually true, but we've found actually quite a neat solution for it. So day one, we are very much focused from an API integration standpoint. It's where we were. What that means for the club is effectively a tech resource, and I'm talking about kind of really getting in. So let's assume everything's been agreed. You now need a tech resource internally to absorb those APIs, and that comes with its own challenges and hurdles. And I think that's something that needs to be navigated. So we took a holistic view of that, and look, the rate of change of where technology is going, there is a solution out there that definitely simplifies it. So I touched on it earlier. So it's a software development kit. What that does is it encapsulates all the value adds from our point of view. So if you call it onboarding of the fan, the payment solution of the fan, the verification that the person who's logging in says who they are, we box these out into software development kits. So what it means for the club is all they have to do is go and absorb these boxes into the app, and all they then have to worry about is how that looks on the front end. So it minimizes the tech resource that they need to get this over the line. To touch on your earlier point is this going to disrupt my existing technology? We will look to complement the existing ecosystem, not to disrupt it, or in certain scenarios there will be an element of disruption, but it complements the existing infrastructure. So we're never going in there and saying you actually have to tear down what you've already built over the X amount of years and the relationships, and kind of, again, there's long-standing relationships with certain banking providers, but we very much go in there to complement it and to give the fan that additional, as I said, tertiary opportunity to kind of go and spend or go and redeem points or whatever it might be. So it's always complementary. And again, that is much better explained to the decision makers and the ones that understand kind of how this operates. And typically that's another one of the challenges when we're speaking to clubs, is sometimes the left hand doesn't speak to the right hand. Mm-hmm. And again, it's about circumventing and getting to the right people within the club so they understand fully the solution at hand.
And the upfront investment to bring you on board?
We're very much built on a SaaS model. Right. So it's not exponential fees. There's ultimately a cost of integration, which is typically a flat fee. From there onwards, each fan for utilising the service is charged a monthly fee, but that's directly to the fan. Ultimately, from the club standpoint, they then get utilisation of a platform. So there's a platform fee that we charge the club on a monthly basis, and that's it. So very simple model. We could have built a whole heap of complexities into it, but that would go against kind of our ethos of kind of just keeping things smart and simple. I think SaaS revenue generating models work well from our standpoint, but I think the simplicity of that when presented to a club is also just a very neat and simple solution. So we just try and keep things as kind of uniform and straight to the point as possible.
Tell us a bit about the sort of traction you've gained so far.
Sure.
What sorts of clubs, leagues, organisations have adopted or are looking to adopt?
So we're in advanced stages with, and I unfortunately can't mention some names, but we're very close to closing a couple of championship clubs. We're in advanced discussions with a couple of Premier League clubs. Now, the nice thing about our solution is the pan-European offering, because we're regulated out of Europe as well. So we've kicked off discussions in Italy. We've got some keen interest in Spain. And I think that's the nice thing is that whatever we're doing in the UK, we can do across Europe. And we can also work wider than just the football clubs. And what I mean by that is there are, and naturally within any industry, you get kind of spin-offs that kind of support the industry. A really good example is there's an outfit in Greece and Cyprus, and they look at the administration for around 300 football clubs. Now, we're working with them, or very closely working with them, to integrate our solution there, and that gets us from 0 to 300 clubs very quickly, but also downstream then to kind of their entire fan base. So that's kind of the engagement that we're looking at. I think the other nice thing about this space is football is one industry. We can lift and drop this arguably into any sport at any level, and I mean from youth through to kind of outright professional. We can hit every tier and really provide some value add. I mean, we touched on rugby a little bit earlier. There's definitely a proposition there. In terms of this room, I really see the value and the benefit, and I think for us, if we get the opportunity to speak to those kind of, be it the kind of digital strategic officers that are in the space, we can really provide some value add.
It strikes me as well that it's what the fan might expect now as well of the experience of live entertainment.
Sure.
And particularly if you think about everybody wanting the next generational fan, and we've all seen consultancy reports now about the 18 to 25-year-old cohort and how they're disengaging with some more traditional sports and re-engaging or engaging for the first time with newer sports.
Yep.
And so presumably that expectation now in the technology user wants it to be holistic. They want it to be simple. They don't want multiple touch points.
That's exactly right. And I think even one further to that is you don't now have to have ever visited the stadium to still gain the fan experience. And that's key. So what you're now not only doing is kind of, yes, you've got your market in terms of those that are coming to the games, but now via the app, we can offer a global solution. So let's just keep it very simple in terms of, I don't know, let's say United's following in Europe, for example. We can now, through our licensing setup, get United fans in Europe signed up to the United app, offer the same solution, but they're doing it in Europe, sat in their seat in France, wherever they may be. We can do exactly the same with a partner we have on the ground in the US. So a big drive for the Premier League clubs is the US market. So we've got a partner that can offer, so we're effectively the tech solution there, but we've got a partner on the ground that holds the licensing that allows us to really go and segment the fan base in the States. So if you look at what happens at pre-season, there is a big drive for the US market. It's a huge captive audience that watches the Premier League, for example, on a very regular basis. And a lot of the clubs are driving, and even vice versa, investment coming into the clubs. If you've seen the influx of US investors coming in, there's definitely another opportunity there. So that capturing the global audience is on our roadmap in terms of what's coming up in the future. So we're set from a European UK standpoint, and we're growing that into the US, and then beyond that we're looking at the Middle East with what's happening in Saudi and specifically, and even further afield into Asia, where you've got, again, arguably more than half the world's population sat on that side of the world. So that's kind of our trajectory, but to ensure that global element allows you to not have multiple touch points as a fan. If you are a fan of Arsenal, you have the ability to be driven through the app, and you can get all the news and feed and experience that you want kind of driven through the Arsenal app. That's key for Arsenal, key for any club, but also very key from a fan engagement point of view.
Fascinating. Yeah, again, most clubs want to engage with that fan that won't visit Manchester or London or Barcelona or wherever, but still want an engagement with the club.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think it's if you're not engaged, well, you want to engage with the fan and then get them utilising the assets of the club. So be it buying the shirt, having the ability to buy that shirt, but also be rewarded for it. Or maybe you do it in a way that allows them to get to a game where you're. And again, one of the other things that and we didn't have this discussion, but at some point there will be games being played during the on-season out in the States. I think it's a matter of time before that comes. But that allows you, again, to start segmenting that captive audience base that you've already got, and now you can start kind of seeing, right, there's some real traction for us to go and play a game mid-season in Arizona, I'm inventing. But there's a real value add because you've captured the data, you've captured the fan base, you know that 60,000 fans will roll in and watch this game. So you can see, again, from a commercial point of view, there's some real value to be had.
I remember when the All Blacks played Ireland in Chicago, whatever it was, phenomenal success. Yeah. So people, again, sometimes are wary of adopting technology because they fear it's moving so fast, it quickly gets out of date or replaced with a second or third or fourth generational platform or model. So talk to us a bit about that longevity of this particular technology, and then also what innovations are you now seeing, or how will this develop, do you think, in the upcoming months? What's out there that's going to be new on the block?
Sure. So I think the SDK solution that I mentioned, the software development kit, that puts the burden of keeping things updated with us as the financial technology offering. So we will always take that burden. What does that mean for the club? Ultimately, that you, as the SDK evolves, there is no meaningful change on the front end. It just updates. So our technology in the background is held with us, and we'll do all the heavy lifting. So that's a really nice solution. So not only does it help from a cost standpoint, but in terms of growth and evolution and innovation that's coming, we're at the tip of that, and we've got that kind of the tip of our fingers, if you like. So we'll continually evolve the solution to ensure that it is state-of-the-art, it's secure. So that's another angle, right? When we're talking about a fully digital offering, is cybersecurity. So that's, again, one of our kind of a key ethos, if you like, is to ensure that we maintain that, and that was something that is constantly evolving. So that's just a kind of a bit of a snapshot as to kind of what we do from a technology standpoint. In terms of innovation in the space, I think kind of putting on Andaria, our first port of call is really the fan engagement piece. You can see how that evolves into the sponsors and the partners piece within the club's ecosystem. We also see that evolving into the transfer space. If you look at the way embedded finance will evolve, so today, yes, we're embedded finance, but we're specifically embedded payments. Our journey will move into the the finance side of things, so the ability to offer credit solutions, which can then tie into transfer markets. The other interesting one is reconciliations. So what do I mean by that? We're talking to clubs that aren't maybe quite state-of-the-art when it comes to managing contracts of players, for example. And a very interesting conversation that I had with one of the commercial directors of a championship club is they had sold a player on, I think, maybe a couple of seasons ago, and he had a few clauses in his contract, if it hit certain appearances, that this club would be due some funds back. That's today is managed on an Excel spreadsheet, so we can really provide a nice and easy solution there, and it's very simple from our point of view. So I think there are, as I said, we're at the tip of the iceberg here, and there is lots of nuances in what we can do. From an industry standpoint, I think we are the first movers from an embedded finance point of view. I think those clubs that can understand this, can grasp this reasonably in a good time frame, will be ahead of the curve in comparison to their competition. It's for me, if you look at the market as a whole, we're talking about, I think, $30 trillion in 10 years. It's very, very sizable, and there's plenty of room for competition. The nice thing is that we're a bit of a kind of standard bearer from a B2B2C standpoint, so really consumer facing. We're probably one of the first ones actually making some noise in the space.
Fantastic. You mentioned there cybersecurity. That's come up as well in quite a few discussions.
Yeah.
What information do you give to what app, and how secure is that? Do you look after that security, or is that down to the clubs?
We do that, so we will complement. So the club will already have something existing, typically from an app standpoint.
Yeah.
We have, by regulation, to ensure we are PSD2 compliant, for example. So we have to ensure that from a regulation point of view, we tick all of the boxes. So actually what we're doing is we're enhancing the security of the football club's existing app. So it's complementary, but we do all of the heavy lifting there, because the burden to the regulator will sit with us. So therefore, we want to ensure that that data is protected. Whoever is logging in is who they say they are. So that was actually one of the early challenges we found within the embedded model, because of something called a man-in-the-middle attack. And I'll try not to get too geeky here, but if I log into the app, Arsenal, let's use Arsenal. Arsenal have to, number one, we have to verify that it's me logging in. So we create an SDK solution that effectively circumvents the Arsenal app because they're utilizing financial services. So they come into us, we do the multi-factor authentication, and that confirms that Nirav actually is the right person logging in here.
Yeah.
And then we can open them up to the app to allow them to make financial transactions.
Very, very interesting.
So,
Nirav, what advice would you give to the people in the room, people who are considering this, not quite, perhaps technically as knowledgeable as you?
Sure.
You will talk to these people and hear the blockers.
Sure.
You'll hear the pushbacks every day.
Yeah.
So what would be the general advice from you as to just consider this?
I would, my advice especially in the discussions that we've had today, I think, as I said earlier, the left hand doesn't seem to speak to the right, the right hand in many situations. So I think there's one key challenge. But I think the other one is really get an understanding of the digital ecosystem. So whether you take we take a very consultative approach. So we kind of go in there and really understand what is it that the club has, what is it missing, and really then have you thought about kind of who you're using as an acquiring partner, because if you're using a certain one, there's maybe certain limitations. So I think that's the key, is really understanding your digital landscape and not necessarily just fragmenting it into smaller sections, because what that does is just create inefficiencies, and the impact of that is not only on the club, it's on the fan, which if you're effectively then trying to segment and utilize the data, you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot. So the view is look at the landscape, take stock. I mean, even asking the silly questions, there's no such thing as a silly question, but ultimately it's finding the right consultative partner to do that with you. And then ultimately really decide, right, what is out there in the market? That's the other thing we also ask all the clubs to do, is actually go and look at what's out there. It doesn't have to be us, but I'm pretty confident in saying the way we do it is better than the others, or better than our competition. But we never want to be that hard sell. I'd much rather go in and they kind of do this of their own accord, but really understand the value add.
So the advice would be get your CFO talking to your CTO, talking to your Chief Customer Growth Officer, and looking at this particular offering as a holistic win-win for the club and the fan.
That's it. And you hit the nail on the head. It's the decision makers in the room are the key. So if you've got your CFO, if you've got your digital strategy officer, your CTO, kind of anyone in the tech kind of finance space, if you can bring them together in the room, I mean, we can really present the value add from our point of view. It's them, they will get it. And when they're talking to each other, they'll kind of see the value between the two. That's really the nail on the head.
Phenomenal. Well, Nirav, thank you. I'm afraid that is the fastest half hour I think I've experienced in ages. Incredibly rich content, fabulous insights. I'm sure we'll all take some takeaways away from this discussion and consider what we're all going to do about that in the future. I look forward to using more of your white labeled apps.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much for your time. Nirav Patel.
Thank you.